Yo, what's up everybody, it's Tuna. Today's build guide I want to show you the Impending Doom Pathfinder, which I consider to be one of the strongest Leaguestarters for the 3.22 season, as well as one of the strongest endgame builds, with investment later on. This build is a poison build. That means it's a chaos damage over time build, and you will deal poison damage to enemies when you inflict Doom on them. The Impending Doom skill gem essentially is a support gem that is supported by a main curse. What happens is, when you apply that curse, it applies a debuff to the monster. And once that debuff expires, through the curse disappearing, its duration elapsing, or the curse being removed forcefully, what's going to happen is it's going to deal a chaos explosion in an area. Now, thanks to the Pathfinder, that chaos explosion can proliferate, meaning that your clear is going to be extremely boosted by this. And as you can see on screen right now, we are dealing with a T16 map with additional content, and the build is very well taking care of the packs in there, because of the fact that if one monster dies, that poison spreads to all enemies nearby, meaning that it scales quadratically with pack size and does extremely well in difficult mapping content such as Delirium and such. The difficulty of this build, I would say, is quite moderate, because there are a few intricate mechanics that you need to keep in mind when putting the character together. However, once you do understand these basic fundamental mechanics, it is very easy to put your character together and there's not all that much you need to worry about. The budget on the high end, I would say, is pretty moderate. Early on, there is a unique that you have to get that is going to be basically enabling the build. And that is the Vixen's Entrapment. That is the reason why we have to put this up at moderate budget. The rest of the gear is not going to be all that expensive. This build is an insane mapper. It does very well. However, for bossing, it has not the greatest single target damage, and also is reliant on standing still, meaning that you're going to have to sort of be, to get maximum uptime on DPS, you're going to have to be standing still for as much as possible. However, that is not that much of a problem, since our defenses are absolutely insane. You'll be able to tank basically anything in the endgame, and face tank most bosses as well, as long as you're not standing in the obvious one-shot mechanics, of course. Let's talk a little bit about the Ascendancy order. The first one we want to take while leveling is going to be Nature's Appraisal. What this is going to do is it's going to allow us to inflict Withered. Withered is a debuff that makes enemies take increased chaos damage. Because we're playing Poison Concoction early on, we're hitting enemies multiple times per attack, we're going to be able to stack this up very fast. It's going to give us a huge multiplicative damage increase in the early game and boosts you all the way through the campaign. The second Ascendancy we want to pick is going to be Master Toxicist. This is what is going to enable our poisons to proliferate. Essentially, it's also going to give us 20% more damage, because it's going to give our poisons a 20% chance to deal 100% more damage. So essentially that translates to 20% more damage. The main thing about this Ascendancy is the fact that it scales multiplicative with pack size. What that means is that the more monsters are dying nearby a target, the more poisons will transfer to tankier targets. If you imagine there's a pack of 20 mobs, and those 20 mobs have each one poison on them, and there's one rare monster within this pack, what's going to happen is that those 20 poisons are all going to be transferring onto the one monster that hasn't died yet. What this allows you to do is it allows you to clear packs very smoothly, and it also makes sure that you are not leaving behind any stragglers or tanky monsters, as long as there are, packs of monsters around it to sort of transfer all those poisons. Next, we're going to be taking Nature's Adrenaline. Nature's Adrenaline is going to give us a lot of flask sustain. What this means is that you'll be able to use your flasks more freely and gain more benefits from them, because you're able to further invest into them thanks to their reliability. Furthermore, in endgame, you're going to be able to fully rely on your flasks. You're going to be using them for not only damage reduction as well as resistance, and that is going to alleviate a lot of the stress that you have on your gear. It's going to make it possible to also get a lot of mana cost reduction. Lastly, for Uber Lab, we will take Master Surgeon. This is especially strong in the early game, where we don't have that much recovery or tankiness. What essentially this will do is it'll make it so your life flask becomes permanent regeneration, because its effects are not removed when your life is filled. What this also means is that you can heavily invest into your life flask by taking some passive skills as well as rolling it in a certain way to allow it to have the maximum recovery and extend that recovery for as long as possible. Essentially what this is going to do is it's going to allow you to have thousands of recovery per second, and it's going to enable you to basically have infinite regeneration through maps and allow you to recover from back to back if you were to take damage. Later on in the endgame, however, once we do actually roll our flasks and we have permanent uptime on them, it is much better to change that to Nature's Boon, because Nature's Boon is going to basically give you an increase of 30% to all your flask effects. Because we are taking a lot of our resistance from flasks, what this is going to do is going to give us extra resistance and damage reduction to the elements that we're resisting, as well as give us additional utility such as mana cost reduction and any other suffixes that you might have crafted on those flasks. For farming strategies, this build really excels at mapping. That's why we're going to be focusing on primarily the following league mechanics: Delirium, Expedition, Breach, Bestiary, Eldritch Altars, Blight, as well as a few others like Delve. But keep in mind that once you are in endgame, you can also do Harvest and endgame bosses. This is going to need a little bit more investment to get going smoothly though, so keep that in mind. Let's talk about the key mechanics of this build. Impending Doom is a support gem that is supported by a Hex Curse. What you want to do is you want to socket Temporal Chains as well as Impending Doom into your main 6th link. One thing to note is that the Impending Doom skill gem is going to greatly increase its damage through gem levels. You're getting a level 21 or above through gem corruptions as well as chest corruption implicit. It's going to give you substantially more damage. The way that Impending Doom works is it applies the debuff to the monsters whom you hex, and once that hex expires, it's going to explode. Additionally, we can increase the AoE of this with Spell Cascade. And what it's going to do is it's going to make your hex go from being just a circle, as you can see, being cascaded both in front and behind your mouse, as such. Now, if we were to demonstrate that on monsters, all you would see is that we are applying a hex to them. However, the damage doesn't happen. We have to wait for that hex to expire, and that's when we'll get the Impending Doom explosion. Like that. So you think to yourself, that's really clunky. How do I make this work properly? Well, that's where Vixen's Entrapment comes in. So to demonstrate, we'll take Spell Cascade both out of Vixen's Entrapment and Impending Doom. What happens is that Vixen's Entrapment actually casts curse skills when you cast a curse skill. Essentially, when I will cast Temporal Chains, which is my main 6th link, it's going to overlap curses on top of that. As you can see, instead of 1 curse, we now have 4 curses being cast. And when you think to yourself, why 4 curses if our curse limit is 3? Since we have 1 base curse, 1 additional curse because of Whispering Doom, and 1 additional curse because of Vixen's Entrapment. Well, that is exactly how we explode Impending Doom. Because as I previously said, Impending Doom only triggers once a curse expired, or it's forced off a monster. Basically, what we want to do is we want to apply a curse onto the first socket of Vixen's Entrapment, that is the top left socket, that we do not want to apply to the monsters. In this case, we will slot Punishment here. What's going to happen is, as we cast, it's going to cycle through the curses, and it's basically going to remove one of the curses when the last one is cast. And the curse that is actually removed is the first curse in your Vixen's Entrapment. That means that we will apply both Enfeeble, Despair, and Temporal Chains on the monsters. When we put Spell Cascade in there, additionally, what it's going to do is it's going to create overlaps. Spell Cascade itself doesn't actually give you any damage, but you think to yourself, why would you use it? That is because we now are creating areas of overlap. What that means is that we can actually double our damage by hitting a monster twice if he is within those overlaps. The way that we want to position ourselves to hit this overlap is right in front of a monster and put our mouse right behind it. As you can see, this area in between the 2 curse overlaps, that is where we want to have our main target. Let me demonstrate that here as well. This is what it looks like once you are blowing up your curses instantly. As you can see, it is a 1 cast and it's cycling through all of our curses. Now let me demonstrate that without Spell Cascade and without Punishment. What you will see is that we are applying 3 curses in succession and it won't blow up. That's because our curse limit is 3. But as soon as we get our 4th curse limit, our 4th curse in, that is when it's going to blow up. Now that we understand the basics behind how Impending Doom works, it is important to also explain the cooldown reduction mechanic of the skill. So as you can see, Doomblast has a cooldown time of 0.15. And what we want to do is we want to reduce that to as much as possible. Because that is basically going to be our bottleneck for dealing more hits per second in endgame once we get a ton of cast speed. There is a correlation between how much cast speed you want and how much cooldown reduction you want. But it's important to note that more cooldown is always better. However, more cast speed might not be better. So make sure that you're checking PoB, as the damage numbers will reflect whether you have too much cast speed or too little cast speed. You can play around with that in PoB and basically get your numbers right until you find a sweet spot and off you go. But in early game, all you have to worry about is getting as much cooldown reduction as possible. There are 3 places where we can get cooldown reduction. There's a Veiled Craft that you can get that gives you cooldown reduction on the belt. It is 12% crafted and up to 20% if you get the Veiled Craft. There is an Eldritch Boot implicit that you can also craft, and that is an Eater of World implicit. As you can see, this is greater and it's up to 6%. And the last place we can get cooldown reduction is the Balance of Terror Cobalt Jewel. This is a jewel that is returning this league. It is Sanctum unique jewel and might be quite expensive early on, but keep in mind that this is going to give you a substantial DPS increase of 20% more damage in endgame, so it is absolutely worth it to get this once you are looking to min-max the build. What is this going to do is it's going to increase the cooldown recovery rate if you've cast Temporal Chains in the past 10 seconds. So it is extremely important to have Temporal Chains in your main links and not one of your other curses once you do get this jewel. Before that, however, you don't have to worry. Now that we understand our offensive mechanics of Impending Doom, I want to talk a little bit about the Pathfinder Flask uptime. This is very, very important in endgame because you want to have Flasks be up 100% of the time. We're going to be 100% relying on the buffs that we get from the suffixes as well as the implicits of these Flasks. We need to have the damage reduction as well as the resistance to cap out our resistance and the mana cost reduction to be able to cast our skills with 0 cost. The way we achieve this is by getting the Careful Conservationist passive as well as the passives leading up to it, and a cluster which grants us Spiked Concoction, as well as Brute for Potency. Additionally, what it does is it also gives you a little bit more flask duration. Coming in the Ancestor expansion, we are also getting Tattoos, which will increase the flask effect duration by an additional 6%. This is going to make it easier for you in the early game. This is going to allow you to get the flask effect duration required to have 100% uptime on your flasks. Lastly, there are many modifiers that you can get on your belt. In this case, I have the 40% increased flash charges gained. However, the flash duration, as well as reduced flash charges used, are also viable here, as your main priority is just mainly going to be getting as high of a duration as possible, or as long as possible, so that you can rely on your flasks to mitigate damage, as well as provide you resistances and mana cost reduction. So on top of the damage reduction that we are getting from our flasks, we are going to be mitigating damage by totally shifting our physical damage we take into elemental. The Pathfinder can do this very easily through the Lightning Coil unique armor, which is going to mitigate 50% of physical damage, and it's going to shift that onto lightning damage. We're going to be using the Dawnbreaker shield, which is going to give us an additional 20%. So at this point, we are 70% shift. We can also craft 6% on the implicits, and that is with the Eldritch Ichor, as well as 8% on the suffixes. And this is just a bench craft. Finally, the remainder of our physical shift is going to come from the flask, the Taste of Hate. Make sure that you know exactly how much physical damage you need to shift, as getting a high roll for this is going to be very expensive. So if you don't actually need up to 15%, you can cheap out on a 10% roll instead, and that is going to be substantially cheaper than getting a max rolled one. Thanks to these defensive layers, we are going to be very, very tanky in that endgame because we have a ton of suppression capped at 100%, so we are preventing 53% of spell damage we take. We're going to be having a ton of damage reduction from our flasks. We're going to be taking no physical damage because we're shifting that all into elemental damage. And thanks to the mitigation that we're getting from flasks, we're reducing a lot of that and having no problems dealing with it. There are a few map modifiers you want to avoid on this build, of which players have reduced percent effect of non-curse aura from skills. It's going to greatly reduce your grace, thus make you a lot less evasive to attacks. Monsters are hexproof. It's going to make it so monsters do not get affected by hexes. You can still Doom Blast them. However, you're not going to be gaining the benefit of your Temporal Chains, or your Despair, or Enfeeble. So that means that you're going to be a lot less tankier, and you're going to deal a lot less damage. Players have percent less recovery of life and energy shield. It's going to make it that early on, once you're still using Eldritch Battery, you won't be actually regenerating your energy shield quick enough to cast your abilities. And also, it's going to make it a little hard for you to heal when monsters actually, damage you. Lastly, monsters have a percent chance to avoid poison, bleed, or blind. We only really care about the poison portion of this, but this is going to drastically reduce the damage you deal, because the way that poison works is we're going to be stacking damage onto enemies, and if they have a percent chance to avoid you stacking that poison, you're going to be basically dealing a percent less depending on how much avoidance they have, right? So 70% chance to avoid poisons essentially means 70% less damage. So once you find yourself in maps what you really want to do is you want to keep your Divine Blessing Malevolence up. This is a duration of 20 seconds at this point because of the skill effect duration that we get on the passive skill tree. So it's quite easy to just click once every 20 seconds. Or if you're like me, click it every 3 seconds because you fidget, then you're, you're a degenerate. But make sure that it's up all the time. Next, you're going to be using your shield charge and your flame dash to traverse the map. And you're going to be doing a single cast of temporal chains on monsters when you encounter. Poison proliferation is going to take care of your clear. So you don't have to worry too much about looking for stragglers within packs, as they're mostly going to die as soon as monsters around them die. This playstyle will take some time getting used to, but once you do, you'll find that it's very, very smooth, and you won't have to really worry too much about monsters being left in your maps. As you can see from the screen, it's honestly really, really satisfying, and I really enjoy this playstyle, as it allows me to basically just pack as much monsters as I can into my map, and get rewarded for it because of the way that poison proliferation works. As previously mentioned in the guide for bossing, we want to position our mouse in a certain way so that we gain benefit of the spell cascade double hit mechanic. And I'm going to showcase that here. Position your mouse right behind the target so that you see the spell cascade overlap 2 hits onto the enemy. Once you do that, you want to be just basically spamming right click and keeping your malevolence aura up as much as possible. Position your mouse in a certain way that you hear 2 distinctive pops every time you cast, and you can basically just face tank everything as long as you have your flasks up and you have a life recovery going on. For our Pantheons, since we are ailment immune, we do not gain benefit of the Brine King, aside for its ability to prevent stunning hits once you've been stunned in the past 2 seconds. So we're going to be focusing on getting fully upgraded Lunaris, Aracali, or Solaris. My favorite one in endgame is going to be the Soul of Aracali, because we have so much damage reduction for hits. The one thing that can actually still get us is damage over time. When you upgrade it, it's going to give you not only reduced damage over time taken, it's going to also make debuffs expire on you 20% faster, and give you additional chaos resistance against damage over time. So that's going to be useful once you don't have capped chaos resistance. For our minor Pantheons, I would always go for the Soul of Abrath if I was running Searing Exarch altars. That is because there is an option on those altars to drop Burning Ground once you kill an enemy. So this is basically going to make you immune to that. However, in early game, once you are playing Poison Concoction, it is absolutely most important that you have the Soul of Verslatha spec, because this is going to give you 3 charges every 3 seconds if you haven't used the Life Flask recently. Using Poison Concoction is going to consume your Life Flask charges, however, it's not going to consider them as being used. So what this is going to do is it's essentially going to give you a ton of Flask sustain in early game to be able to spam Poison Concoction at maximum DPS efficiency. Now let's talk a little bit about the leveling progression. In this path of building, you will find notes telling you what gems to get at what level. Additionally, you can also check out the max roll guide, which will be linked in the description, that is going to have tips and tricks as well as extensive notes from Titykiller himself, explaining how to level the build all the way through to endgame. If you do wish to take a look at the POB, however, there is also going to be skill sets here, so you can see which skill gems you want to use at what level of progression. Going to have that for items as well, so you can see Poison Concoction, Curse Ground, early, mid, and late, as well as leveling trees for early on all the way up until endgame. So let's go through that real quick. You will want to be pathing through the attack speed here, but your priority here is to rush replenishing remedies, because it's going to give you life flask sustain, as well as the mastery that gives you 1 additional charge every 3 seconds. So these two together is going to enable you to use Poison Concoction early without running out of life flasks. Make sure that you get as many life flasks as possible. 2 or 3 is going to be the best. However, if you do find yourself running out, you might eventually actually want to go for more or roll your flasks better. It's really important to keep your flasks upgraded and to roll them as you go along. So make sure that you're checking the vendor or picking them up off the floor whenever possible. For level 12 to 25, we're going to be taking some life and we're going to be pathing through Primal Spirit. Primal Spirit is going to give you mana gain on hit if you've used the mana flask in the past 10 seconds. Basically give you mana sustain in the early game. Next, we will path down to Toxic Strikes. It's going to give us some damage over time as well as chance to poison on hit. And then we will take Graceful Assault. Graceful Assault is really, really good because it's going to give you Onslaught on kill. Onslaught is not only going to give you a lot of movement speed, 20%, it's also going to give you 20% attack speed. So this is going to make your early game feel a lot smoother as you're traveling through zones. From here, level 25 onwards, we're going to take some life here at Thick Skin, and now we will path through the Quick Step. If you can see the progression here, we actually respect one node here, we path through here like this, and then we respec that node out. Essentially, it's going to look like this. So we path through Quickstep for some movement speed, a little bit of life on Intuition, and then we take Herbalism. Once you take Herbalism, make sure that you get the 50 flat life mastery, as this 50 flat life early on has extreme value. Next, you'll take Swift Venoms for a little bit of attack speed, additional chance to poison on hit with attacks, and then you'll take the mastery to inflict on non-poison enemies. It's going to deal 300% increased damage. So what this means is that your first poison concoction that you throw, it's going to deal 300% increased damage. And this is going to basically enhance your clear, in some cases prevent you from having to attack a second time. From level 38 onwards, you want to go into Charisma, because now is when you want to be allocating and slotting all of your auras. So at this point, you'll grab Charisma, and then you'll travel all the way up here to Fatal Toxin. Fatal Toxin is going to be giving you increased damage over time, as well as a little bit more chance to poison on hit and a bit of poison duration. You will want to take Careful Conservationist, because it's going to give you reduced flash charges used, as well as a little bit of flash charge effect. And at that point as well, you want to be getting 4% recover when you use a flask. So when you press your flask, you're going to recover a little bit of extra life. Then we want to take Blood Drinker. This is going to be really nice because you get a ton of life, as well as some life on kill. So as long as you're killing things, you're going to be recovering your life. And then Multi-Shot, which will give you an additional projectile. This is really nice early, because we're not going to be wanting to use both GMP anymore, as well as after the nerfs, it's going to consume way too many life flash charges. So having an extra projectile here is just a damage multiplier without the need of actually expending a support gem. For accuracy, make sure that you are keeping track of that. So you can grab Acuity. It's going to give you a bunch of attack speed, additional accuracy, as well as give you access to the accuracy mastery. This is the best one to use early on, as it's going to give you a ton of accuracy rating. As you level forward through the campaign, it's going to diminish. Early on, it's extremely valuable. Make sure that you open your character panel and that your accuracy is capped at all times, as long as you're using Poison Concoction. Since Poison Concoction is an attack, if you are low on accuracy, you can also use Precision or try to craft it on your gear. From level 54 to 62, this is when we will change our pathing here a little bit. We will want to be pathing to natural remedies as well for additional flash sustain. And then we'll take Thick Skin. And now we will also take Revenge of the Hunted for additional life, as well as the Wasting Wheel here. And then you will take the Mastery that gives you 5% chance to inflict Wither up to 15 debuffs instead. So that means that there's a 5% chance when you inflict Wither to deal 15 stacks of Wither instead. It's going to give you a huge DPS boost, and it's going to diminish your ramp up time as well. At this point, you want to grab a little bit of suppression. Since you are a ranger, you have access to so much suppression early on, even with just these nodes that you have allocated earlier. And Innervate, you will be basically almost at 70%. So what that means is that if you allocate, the chance to suppress spell damage is lucky. Going to give you a ton of suppression. You'll be near cap, just like that. Or pseudo cap is a good way to put it. Next, you'll want to basically path all the way up to Eldritch Battery. This is because Eldritch Battery is basically going to give you a ton more mana sustain, in the way that it will convert your energy shield into mana. So basically, you'll be able to have additional mana to spend for your attacks, and it will basically make it much easier to manage that. We'll grab a little bit more damage with Atrophy, more mana reservation, as well as aura effect. And then we'll travel up here for the additional curse. So you want to have the additional curse, and once you have the additional curse, that is when you want to put in your mark of submission. And in your mark of submission, you want to put Despair or Temporal Chains. So make sure you apply that, and you also grab the 5% curse effect here, because that is a ton of damage on top of that. So from here on out is basically when you want to be looking to get a Vixen's Entrapment. However, I have filled out the rest of the tree in case you want to be remain Peaconk, or in case you haven't found your Vixens yet if you're playing SSF or can't afford it in Trade League. I do think that it's better to stay Poison Concoction for as long as possible, as Poison Concoction I think is much stronger than the Cursed Ground variant of the build. However, if you do want to change the Cursed Ground, which is a way to actually trigger Impending Doom without the need of Vixens, then you can see here there's a Cursed Ground gear set, a Cursed Ground skill gem set, as well as a Cursed Ground skill tree here. Now though, you'll want to be using Vixen's Entrapment once you acquire them, and then you'll want to do the same here, swap all of these to the early game, and then early game here as well, so that you can see exactly the pathing in the early game variant of the build. The reason why we path all the way here is because Skittering Runes is just insane for the build. It gives you a ton of mana reservation for curse skills, as well as mana cost reduction and increased AoE. 50% increased AoE is like actually insane for the build. It's going to give you bigger overlaps. It's going to also give you better coverage on your curses. Basically, it's just too good not to have. But later on, once we get a better amulet and we get 1 opal and 2 silver oils, you'll want to anoint this as soon as possible, because it is extremely inefficient to actually path down here, but it is such a good passive that we have to do that. But when you do get a good amulet, you want to be basically swapping out of that as early as possible. Keep in mind, however, that in early game, you will not have a 100% chance to poison on hit with your Impending Doom, because spells generally have a harder time getting 100% poison on hit. So what you must do is you must anoint Toxic Strikes, which gives you 15% chance to poison on hit, as well as some damage over time. Luckily, this is very, very cheap. It's just going to be a Crimson, an Amber, and a Clear. You can look for a Talisman as well if you prefer. But essentially, you want to get that as soon as you swap to Impending Doom, until you have the Herald of Agony alternative quality, which is the Divergent Herald of Agony, which is going to give you an additional 20% chance to poison on hit. So if there is something that you must do before changing to the mid-game variant of this build, it is going to be, first of all, to anoint your Skittering Runes, and secondly, to buy Divergent Herald of Agony as soon as possible. So at this point, when we go into mid-game, that is when you'll see a big shift. Instead of going all the way here to the left, we will put those points into Cluster Jewels, and we will also be, swapping our Anoint on top of that. You can see here, if I change the gear, we will be swapping our Anoint to Skittering Runes, and we will be getting also the Divergent Herald of Agony gem here to fill out the remainder of our chance to poison, of course. Divergent Herald of Agony, there it is. So, the priority-wise for the clusters, you don't necessarily have to have these notables here. These notables are the most DPS and the most efficient. But you can basically grab any 8 passive cluster jewel that gives you additional chaos damage, and that's still going to be an upgrade. And the most important thing is that we want to have Spike Concoction and Brute for Potency. Brute for Potency also is optional, but you do want to get additional flash charges gained or additional flash duration on this cluster as well. Essentially, this is going to give us better flask uptime, and flask uptime is going to be defense as well as mana cost reduction and all of that kind of stuff. So keep that in mind. For our other medium, Wicked Pal and Septic Spells is also going to be very good. It's going to give you some poison duration as well as poison on hit, which by this point we should already be capped without it. But yeah, essentially just a ton more damage that way. But if you cannot afford yet these clusters, of course, you can invest those points elsewhere. One thing that you can look to do is, potentially getting additional stats like additional life or anything like that. But yeah, at this point, basically you want to have those clusters, even if they are not fully crafted, like if they're 2 notables or something like that. It is still worth it. It is still a DPS upgrade. We are lacking a lot of damage points on the tree. Poisons generally have this issue where there isn't that much nodes on the tree to invest in, so that's why clusters are important to the build. And then we progress into the late game variant, and this is where things start to get a little bit pricey and spicy, and the build starts being extremely good, I would say. Like you can see here, the defenses are just insane. We are shifting 100% of the physical damage we take to elemental, and we're reducing our elemental damage. But the most important thing to note here in endgame is the fact that you need to have 100% flask uptime, because without this flask being up 100% of the time, you are basically not going to be able to cast your spell. And the way you can see that in Path of Building, you can see here, it says flask uptime 100%. You need that to be 100%. And the way that you achieve that is going to be by having 1 flask affix on your belt, or using the tattoos that we previously mentioned in the build that are going to give you additional flask duration as well as the medium cluster. But once you achieve that, you're going to have 100% mana cost reduction, thanks to also having the prefix crafts. Non-channeling skills have -8, -8, and also on your amulet. So we'll be free to cast Impending Doom and our Divine Blessing. And that is why we're able to drop Eldritch Battery. We won't have the path here anymore. And we can change the pathing on our tree a little bit as well to increase the efficiency and gain benefit of Lethe Shade Keystone as well on top of that, reducing the damage that we take from damage over time. So this will be like more of the endgame variant. You don't have to worry about that in progression, but essentially progression is all there. Make sure you check out the max roll milestones or the Path of Building and refer to that. But if you do have any other questions, of course, you can always come ask me on my stream. I'm streaming basically every day. The chances are I'm probably streaming right now. So, you can just come and ask a question on my stream and I'll be happy to answer anything. I want to sort of glance over some of the milestones that I wrote here on our max roll guide that you can check out. Links will be in the description. We want to look over some of these milestones. So the first thing you'll want to do is get some offhand gems. You want to be leveling 6 Impending Dooms. That is because you want to corrupt those and you want to have a level 21 as soon as possible. That is going to be a massive DPS boost of 15%. A 6th link for this build is also really, really good. Early on, you can grab a Tabula Rasa. And once you do have a Tabula Rasa, if you do want to grab one, you want to allocate the mastery that gives you 15% of life if there are no life modifiers on equipped body armor. You could grab a corrupted 6th link. but make sure that the colors are appropriate to your build, right? Make sure that you are getting the right colors, as it's very expensive early on to change those colors, and you'll need Val Orbs if you do that. The early Syndicate unveils that you do want to grab are going to be movement speed and chance to gain onslaught on kill, as well as regenerate energy shield per second while a rare or unique enemy is nearby. This is going to give you a lot of energy shield sustain on single target, and you want to craft that on your belt as long as you have Eldritch Battery equipped. There's also earlier on ring crafts that are going to give you non-channeling skills minus mana cost of skills, and also watch out for the cooldown reduction, cooldown recovery rate craft as well on top of that. Some great uniques to look out for are going to be the Leper's Alms. Leper's Alms is one of my favorite uniques for poison builds early on, especially Eldritch Battery, because it gives an absolute ton of energy shield that is going to be sustaining. It's going to be increasing the amount of energy shield you regenerate per second, because that is a percentage of your total pool. And it's also going to give you a lot of life. It's going to give you a lot of evasion on top of that, and shared suffering, right? In this build, we are using Purity of Elements, so you don't have to worry about the shared suffering mechanic. However, this shield is just insane, and it's super cheap, so grab that as soon as possible, and it's going to help you a ton with your energy shield sustain, aka your mana, and it's going to give you some damage as well, because it gives you 40% increased duration of ailments on the enemies. Another insane unique that you can look for is going to be the Dodris Scorn, and since we are applying many curses on enemies, this is going to give you a ton of chaos damage for each for your spells. Because, yeah, for every curse on the enemy, you're going to be getting this amount of flat chaos damage. Since we apply 3 curses, that's going to be multiplied by 3. And so, yeah, this is a very good early unique. And as well as the Leper's Alms, it's going to give you energy shield for, for your Eldritch Battery sustain. And, yeah, it's very cheap and available as well, so that's one to look out for. Next, Apex Rage is going to be a one that we use all the way into endgame. So Apex Rage is going to give you poisons inflict damage faster, as well as increased cast speed, as well as chaos damage to spells. So look for Apex Rage as soon as possible. Now, if you want to look at the rest of the milestones, make sure to check out the max roll guide as we go in depth into the mid and late game progression. So that about sums up everything that you need to know about the Impending Doom Pathfinder. I hope you have found this guide helpful, and I hope you found the information here, valuable. I mean, it's one of my favorite builds in the game currently, and one that I just highly recommend for going into the 3.22 expansion. If you wanted to help me out, you could drop a sub, or you could come by the stream, drop a follow on there as well, or drop a comment, or just like the video, Or if you don't want to do any of that stuff, then all good as well. I appreciate your time, boys, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Much love, everybody. I hope you have a good 3.22 Leaguestarter. You guys are the best. I appreciate it. Peace.